Hi, I'm Christie Blatchford, courts columnist for the National Post and Post Media. We are now 1 year past, in a few days, past the murders of Honey and Barry Sherman, whose bodies, you'll recall, I'm sure, were found by the swimming pool of their North Toronto home. And there are lots of questions that remain, and I have absolutely none of the answers. So that's not what I propose to speak about today. I do, however, have some observations, and one of them goes back to a saying that a friend of mine frequently utters, and it's that what the public is interested in knowing is not necessarily in the public interest. By that I mean, of course, that just because we're all dying to know every detail of the police investigation and where it is, doesn't mean that we should know it at this stage, especially while presumably the police are still trying to solve this crime. The second thing I would say is that though it appears, and this is from documents from the Toronto police themselves, so one presumes they are accurate, it appears from documents that the early police working theory was that the deaths were a murder-suicide, and that they later clarified, about 6 weeks later, clarified is not in fact the case. It's now a double murder. So at some point, I think some external body should have a look at this to see if the police made this mistake, why they made it, and what ramifications it had for the investigation itself. The third thing I would say, and I'm sure people will remember this as well, is that in part because of this first police mistake, or what appears to have been a mistake in the hypothesis about the murders, the Sherman family hired criminal lawyer Brian Greenspan, and he began on their instructions to assemble a team of experts, retired homicide detectives and forensic officers, to sort of conduct a parallel investigation with the police probe. That's precisely what any family rich enough would do. I think if someone you love has been murdered and it's not being solved and you could afford to hire private detectives, of course you would. But the truth is most people can't. Most victims of homicide are like the ordinary schmo, like me or you or somebody even more poor. And at some point in this parallel investigation, Mr. Greenspan, the lawyer, held a press conference, I think it was in October last year, where he was very critical of the police investigation. He basically said they had screwed up. They had not even collected all the fingerprints, for instance, that were available. And he then, on behalf of the family, offered a $10 million reward for information leading to a successful arrest and prosecution. And that's all well and good. As I say, I certainly wouldn't fault any family for doing whatever it can to find out who killed somebody you loved. But Mr. Greenspan took it one step further and proposed that his team of experts and the police should work together in a sort of private-public partnership. And that's one step too far, for my thinking anyway, because it would usher in a sort of two-tier criminal justice system. And to some degree, that already exists. I mean, if you're charged with a crime and you have the money to hire a lawyer, you're way ahead of the guy who is charged with the same crime, who doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer, but also is not poor enough to qualify for legal aid, which is very hard to get. So I think that we ought to be very wary of any suggestion that we would have this two-tier system of justice where wealthy families who could afford to hire their own team of experts would do so, and poor families or ordinary families who couldn't begin to do that would not be able to match those resources. And I think what you'd get is a two-tier system of criminal justice, which would be grossly unfair.